Okay, good morning, everyone. Could you hear me? Microphone working? Okay. Good morning. My theme this morning, like our whole conference, is Derech Eretz, but Derech Eretz of a different type or a different focus. How do we develop or overcome the perceived sense that there's a significant lack of Derech Eretz between the Jewish people, and particularly between Jews in Israel and Jews in North America? We feel insulted from each other. We feel foreign to each other. We feel that you don't understand. Each side doesn't feel that they're being understood and heard. We lack Derech Eretz in the multiple senses of the term that I outlined in my opening lecture. We feel often that there isn't common decency. We feel Derech Eretz in the sense of core moral principles, a sense of the good, that we don't share the sense of the good. We have a very different sense of what Israel or what Jews should stand for. But also Derech Eretz in the most practical sense of the term. Derech Eretz, how do we in fact just live with each other? How do we create a functioning Jewish people with each other? What are the rules of the land? Whether the rules of the land literally are the land of Israel or the rules of the land in the rules of the landscape. This landscape of Jews. How do we make sure that the tension and the pain and the feeling of hurt and disrespect and alienation doesn't become a norm and doesn't grow and grow to the extent that, as a colleague of mine said the other day at a conference, maybe Jewish peoplehood is not really a principle. Maybe it's just a 20th century fabrication, and maybe it's time to let it go. I believe such an argument would be a catastrophe. I believe that such an argument violates a core principle of our tradition, in which Judaism starts when a person says, your people are my people, and only then do you get to say, your God is my God. And if that's the case, then finding Derech Eretz amongst us becomes not a politically expedient or even necessary issue for future support for Israel in Congress, which it is, but it's a much deeper question of who are we and whether we are able to sustain a core feature of what it means to be Jewish, and that is we do Jewish together. And as I said the other night, I do not believe that difference undermines our ability to live as a community. How we relate to difference undermines our ability. Today I want to look at, and uncharacteristically for morning sessions, I want to look at Derech Eretz in its broadest sense, looking at both the moral divides and the practical political divides between Israel and North American Jewry. I also want to look at some of the practical political consequences that are put on the table and ask, what options? What are the options that we face in trying to recreate a Derech Eretz? What are there political options? Are they the best way to go? Are there educational options, and are they the best way to go? I'm going to put forth some of my own political perspectives on a number of issues. In doing so, I will be doing so in the spirit of the Hartman Institute. In the Hartman Institute, we're not relativists. Everybody has an opinion. I know what I know. The only thing that I don't know is while I know what I don't know if that which I know is correct. And so I will be stating what it is that I know. But statements of what it is that I know are always in the context of these and these are the words of the living God. And so while I might know that you are wrong, I don't know for sure that you're wrong. And so within that more relaxed spirit, I want to delve into some of the most significant dividing lines and dividing issues facing Israel and North America. The three issues that I want to look at are A, issues of state and religion, focusing on two of the more recent issues that have emerged, and that is the issue of the Kotel and the conversion legislation. Two, I want to look at the issue of occupation. And I want to be clear, the issue of occupation is not just an issue of how we Jews get along. There are people who are experiencing occupation, and the consequence of this is not just a question of how do we sort of feel good about each other. There's very significant consequences for a third party on this issue. And the third issue is the perceived partisanship which is taking over the Jewish discourse between North America and Israel, where Israel is increasingly seen as or sees itself as a red state, while the majority of North American Jews are seen as or see themselves as part of a blue state, and whether that type of divide is healthy for the Jews. Those are the three issues that I want to look at. But since my remarks are going to look very specifically at what are the ways in which I suggest that we think about these questions in the future, political, non-political, educational, it's important that I start with a short political map. And that's the page you have on your seats. The blue, and I did this just on purpose, just to show, and you should just know that the blue-red divide doesn't work in Israel. For example, there is no move for smaller government in Israel. Lower taxation is not an issue in Israeli political life. Israelis, maybe it comes from tzedakah. And when a lot of people ask, where are Israelis in their philanthropy, a major place that Israelis give philanthropically is through taxes. And so the gun control, it's not as if, you pick one issue and I know on every single area what your position is. The blue-red divides in Israel are very, very, very different. But the blue parties, the coalition. Number one, there's three columns. The first is the current Knesset. The second is a more or less aggregate of the polls, almost any poll that's come out in the last 10 years. And the third is the Knesset in 2009, which is the last time that the largest party was from the red parties, Kadima. And which, at that moment, even though Tzipi Livni was the largest party, she could not form a coalition. What I want to, if you look at these numbers, there's a number of really interesting things that you have to notice. Number one, there's a remarkable consistency between blue and red over the years. Shifts a little bit to here, a little bit to there. Most of the shifts that take place are within the blocks. Within the blocks. There aren't radical shifts outside of the blocks. Two, we are now, while in 2009 and 12 it wasn't the case, since 2012, there's been a very strong, consistent group of parties who see themselves as ideal coalition partners. By which I mean the Haredi parties, for example, Shas and United Torah Judaism, who range between 13 to 16 seats. But part of that grows out of the fact that the Shas party also takes seats from the Likud. Not all the people. The natural size of the Shas party in its Haredi population is only 4 seats. It grows because it reaches out to Sephardi Masorati Jews. The natural place for Shas and United Torah Judaism parties to sit, the Haredi parties, is with a Likud Jewish Home coalition. That's where they feel most comfortable. In fact, Yesh Atid, which is the Lapid party, is a red flag for the ultra-Orthodox parties as a result of the draft legislation which Yair Lapid pushed many years ago. So if they had, is the word dithers, is that the term? They had their dithers? Druthers. We'll edit that out later. If they had their druthers, on any given day, they're going to choose a Netanyahu-Bennett coalition over a Yair Lapid, Yesh Atid, and Gabbai Zionist Union coalition. And for good reasons. One of the issues that Netanyahu has to think about is how does he make sure that the ultra-Orthodox parties remember that? And that's a political issue, an agenda for him. But that, there really is nowhere else for them to go. In addition, it gets even more complicated. The 3 parties, or Likud, let's say you take Likud on the one hand, and either the Labor Party, which is now called Zionist Union, or Yesh Atid on the other hand, the 3 parties which claim to potentially to lead a coalition. Likud has the Jewish Home and Yisrael Beitenu, which is Lieberman, solidly within their camp. Yesh Atid has the Zionist Union and Eretz solidly in their camp. Those blocks change from election to election, but more or less, there's about a 5 to 7 seat advantage to the Likud Jewish Home Israel Beitenu coalition over the Yesh Atid Zionist Union Eretz coalition. There is no mathematical way for anybody to build a coalition without the ultra-Orthodox parties. They're 11 to 13 seats. And if the ultra-Orthodox parties do not want to sit with the center-left, that means mathematically, for the perceivable future, the center-left cannot build a coalition. Mathematically, in theory, even if for some reason the ultra-Orthodox parties would decide to do so, you would need Avigdor Lieberman to agree to sit with Eretz. So imagine a nationalist right sitting with a radical left in a coalition together with ultra-Orthodox so that Lapid would be prime minister instead of a much more natural coalition, which would be a Netanyahu. It's basically not going to happen. The only thing that could possibly change the equation would be if the Likud, which now their coalition is 66 to 60, 67, 65, if a new party would come in, and I, like most Israelis, very often I vote for the party that hasn't yet disappointed me, and it's a rule. But if that's the case, it's possible that a coalition cannot be formed even with the ultra-Orthodox parties, in which case the Likud will have to sit with Yesh Atid or the Zionist Union. You ask, why wouldn't they want to do this milachatchila from the first place? Why not create a different form of a coalition, leave the ultra-Orthodox out, which you might feel more comfortable doing? When the Likud and Yesh Atid sit together, it is by definition an unstable coalition, because the agenda of Yesh Atid or the Zionist Union or the Likud, each one of them wants to be the leader. That's why they sit in a the coalition is temporary by definition. The stability of the current coalition is that there is no member, no leader of another party of the coalition which ranks more than 3% of the population seeing them as a potential prime minister. The population doesn't see them as a prime minister. They don't see themselves as a prime minister. They're not changing the equation. They understand that they are a minority party within a coalition. And that's why Netanyahu will always prefer to sit with the Haredim over, for example, Yesh Atid. He tried it in 2012. Didn't work that well. He tried it with the Labor Party in 2009. And then they left. They split. There were other agendas. Here you have a very stable coalition. And under this map, one of the reasons that you have to take the only way for the center-left to build a coalition is that the parallel to the Haredi parties are the Israeli Arab Palestinian parties. And in Israeli political life, both from the side of the Israeli Palestinian Arab members of Knesset and from the other parties, they are not perceived to be viable coalition partners. They see themselves as outside of the Zionist camp. They don't speak. Now, the population is more complicated. The sentiments of Israeli Arab Palestinians is different, but their leadership is a leadership that no Zionist party, whether on the center-left or on the center-right, will in the current constellation build a coalition. This political stability, this political reality is going to serve as a foundation for thinking about the Derech Eretz in the future. From the outset, it means that if your Derech Eretz, or if the way in which Israelis and North American Jews are going to learn to somehow share things together, the way to do so is to change the government in Israel, not likely. That is not part of the current Israeli political landscape. Now, will an indictment of Netanyahu change that? At least doesn't seem likely, but it is possible. Would an indictment of Netanyahu and the emergence of Benny Gantz, of a different political figure, a new white horse on shining armor, could they possibly change for one election? Possibly. And create different coalition? Possible. But at least, as it seems, Gideon Sa'ar, who was supposed to speak here on Thursday, is the number one person to replace Netanyahu, and in every poll, the Likud goes up with him instead of going down. And but again, once the elections come, there's always a little shift. But there is a very strong stability in Israeli society. And that stability is not a result of the political system. It's actually the result of the will of the majority of Israelis. Our coalition reflects the majority of Israeli opinion. It's not a distortion. It's not a manipulation. And when you ask, maybe we shouldn't have the Haredim, let's please remember, Haredim are 10% of Israeli society. And increasingly Zionifized. They see themselves as part of Israel and participate within the Israeli discourse. This stability is very, very important because it changes the Derech Eretz, the practical and also some of the ideological analysis of the realities that we face. let's go now. With this set aside, I want to now go into the three key issues. Yes, please, sir. I don't want to spend much more time on this, especially if you think I'm wrong.
If you said the Israelis had nowhere else to go, does that not, why do they have power? Why do they
Yes, thank you. I was doing that intentionally, and now you're just making me embarrassed at having done so. So what was but I appreciate your awareness of my self-awareness as both of us are trying to overcome our age gaps, or age gaps or age realities. Ladies and gentlemen, could we have what you see here is the technological building block of the kotel. There is a kotel. That kotel has been around, so we say, for quite a while. But the kotel that we had, while the wall was there, it was hidden by a lot of garbage because religious pluralism wasn't exercised between religions, part of the disease of monotheism for another time. While we had a big wall, we just had a little pishy section in which we could pray. Jews, you couldn't build a minyan. You couldn't have a minyan. Not only was it illegal, there wasn't even enough room because you had to stretch out in lines. You couldn't converge. Jews, when they had access and didn't always have access, were able to go as individuals to the kotel to pray. Men, women prayed together. This was the situation until 1967. In 1967, Israel sees this reality. And outside of this area, there's buildings here. All of the above, this is the kotel that we find. The Israeli government says that's going to change. We now are going to build a new kotel. The new kotel, what really changes is not the wall. The wall has been standing for close to 2,000 years. Now this wall is only a small section of the wall. There's a lot under, there's a lot further down. This outer wall of the Temple Mount. What we really changed wasn't the wall. We changed the prayer area. We made it large. Now, it's no longer a place for individuals. Now it's a place where the community could come and pray. But the minute the community could come and pray, it falls under the millet system. Who runs Jewish public life in Israel? There isn't a counter millet, there's only one. Consequently, what happens? There's a mechitza. More significantly, as we're going to see in a moment, it wasn't just the turning of the kotel into an Orthodox synagogue. They bulldozed all of the houses around and created a large plaza. Let's call it the plaza. Not only is there the plaza, given the fact that we're in the Middle East, and this is really, really important, there's not only the plaza, there is the security gate. Because you can't have a place for the public to come if it's not secured. You now need the security gate. Let's call it the security gate. Most importantly, and here this is critical for understanding, the kotel. Here you have Robinson's Arch, you have the Mughrabi Gate. This is the way you get up to the Temple Mount. This is how we lived with this new kotel. This now becomes the kotel. The problem with the kotel is that over time, starting in the 90s, not from within Israeli society particularly, but mostly from some liberal, from the North American Aliyah, which creates some more liberal Jews here in Israel, there was a sense that this Orthodox shul, it's nice that there's Orthodox shuls, but I, as a liberal Jew, don't want to pray in an Orthodox shul. And why is the Kotel an Orthodox shul? This gets bantered around by the Supreme Court over and again because they know it's not right. Chief Justice Alon says, ladies and gentlemen, get over yourselves. The Kotel is a shul. And as an Orthodox shul, it's a shul. It is governed by the millet system, and Israel, after 1967, commits to not changing the status quo in any of the holy sites. That also applies to the Kotel. That is the minority opinion rejected by the majority of the Supreme Court, and Cheshin, then the head of the court, puts forth and says, the Kotel is not a shul. The Kotel is a national monument. And as such, you need to have a different solution. How are we going to solve it when we only have the Kotel? A miracle of Hanukkah occurs. Just as one little, what is it called, of oil? One little thing, what? One little cruise of oil, which should have only lasted for one day, miraculously expanded and lasted for 8. The Jewish people discovered that there is more of the Kotel. And all of a sudden, another section could be also part of the Kotel. So now we have 2 the Kotels. And when we have 2 the Kotels, we could solve the problem. We will all have a part of the Kotel. There'll be an Orthodox Kotel, and there'll be a liberal Jewish Kotel where there won't be a division between men and women. And women of the wall, who were the primary instigators or the primary force to create the change, who most of whom are Orthodox, want separate prayer. There will be a mechitza on the 11 days that women of the wall come to pray at the new part of the Kotel. The Supreme Court asks for this to be regulated. Ultimately, after about 13 years, Netanyahu appoints Sharansky, and Sharansky comes up with the following deal. He says, great, this is a unique moment in Jewish life, which is win-win. We have enough kotel to go around. Who would have thunk? We never have enough to go around. Everybody's going to win. In fact, you know who's going to win the most? The ultra-Orthodox or the Orthodox, because nobody's going to be bothering them all the time. Because what would happen is that the major area of conflict at the Kotel moved to the plaza, right over here. Because if you couldn't get in, this is where liberal Jews would be praying so that they could be at the Kotel, because they couldn't get into this section or this section. So they stayed over here saying, this is the Kotel. And then it was disgusting and arguments. There was no Derech Eretz. When you're walking by each other, spitting and insulting, great, let's separate it. You never have to, when you come in, you never have to get to this section. That you couldn't get to here, we know. But what was Sharansky's solution? Is that you're going to come here, and you're going to be able to go here. Because you're the Kotel. And in fact, the plaza, there's going to be one plaza. And from that plaza, the Kotel has the plaza. Everybody's going to go through the security gate to the plaza. Some will go here, and some will go here. The Messiah has come to Zion. But there is a problem. The problem is that you're changing the status quo of the meaning of the word the. Is there the Kotel? Does that mean that you are now stating that liberal Judaism is part of the millet system? In fact, the Sharansky deal was going to change the status quo. it was going to elevate, and that's why we liberal Jews were so excited by it. It was going to officially elevate to a status of equality under the law of Israel, the legitimacy of liberal Jewish forms of worship within the communal structure. This was a change in the status quo. Further, the Sharansky deal was that on the committee of the Kotel were going to sit liberal Jews. So now, for the first time, liberal rabbis were going to be given official status within the political structural life of Israeli life. Now, there are liberal rabbis in Israel who are funded by the government. But while Orthodox rabbis are funded by the Ministry of Religion, liberal rabbis are funded by the Minister of Sports and Culture. It's not the Minister of Religion. Because you're not, that's the status quo is religion belongs to the millet. The millet is, in Israel, only a millet of Orthodox. Now, that fundamental legal problem we can't change. But the ultra-Orthodox, when they did a rethink and looked, they said, you're changing the status quo. In this coalition discourse, Netanyahu sits with the Haredim, and his core coalition commitment is to maintain the status quo. Anytime the status quo is being changed, the Haredim have a politically legitimate argument, and here there was going to be a change in the status quo. When they come to Netanyahu, and if he says, if they say, I want to change the status quo, he says, you can't change it. But when they're arguing, you're changing it, that threatens the comfortable home that the ultra-Orthodox, then they might as well sit with Yair Lapid, who wants to change the status quo. The deal was put aside. And it's interesting, Netanyahu made a statement which was very insulting and disturbing for North American Jews, but it was actually pretty accurate. The only thing that he forgot to mention was his role in this whole discussion. He actually was trying to do it. He says, I'm not going to allow conservative and reform Jews to have legitimacy in Israel through the back door. Some statement of that the Kotel would be the back door for something. Now, he was creating it. It was his deal, because Netanyahu was always the one who saw North American Jews as a strategic asset to Israel. Throughout his career, up till the last couple of years, he was always the protector of democracy, Supreme Courts, and world Jewry in Israel. That was his role. He was the mature adult who always said stop. Here, ultimately, the Haredim made you're changing the status quo. The deal is shelved. Let me now tell you what the deal is, the current deal. The biggest difference that's taking place now, this new, where you see this Kotel, the government is about to spend $5 million on redoing this area here and access so that there will be a liberal Kotel. But if you noticed, the most significant change is between the word the Kotel. This will no longer be the Kotel. It now becomes a Kotel. And the plaza is only the plaza for those who want to go to the Kotel. How do we do that? By creating a second security gate. There are two core issues that are different today in the new Kotel deal, which is being implemented, and the original. You can't go through the security gate of the Kotel since you're not part of the Kotel. You have to go through a security gate. The security gate of the Kotel only goes to the Millet's Kotel. You have another security gate. You also have no longer access from the plaza to a kotel. The second interesting change, which is actually far more revolutionary, is that a liberal rabbi no longer sits on the kotel committee. But actually something really interesting as a result emerged. The Attorney General of Israel decided that the committee which runs a kotel will have no Orthodox representatives. Since it's a kotel, the kotel falls under the rule of the millet system. Just like you could have liberal synagogues in Israel, a kotel will be completely independent from the Orthodox, and they cannot govern and rule as to what happens there or not. And through a security gate, let's call it the ACG, at the ACG, as distinct from the TSG, at the TSG, nobody's allowed to bring in a Torah, and women aren't allowed to bring in tefillin. But at the ASG, at that magnometer there, tefillin carried by women does not constitute a security risk. And Torahs could be brought in. Now, why did I tell you this story? And oi. I wanted the Sharansky deal. The Sharansky deal was going to be a major step forward for the state of Israel. It was going to create, from the top down, an official recognition of the fact that the Jewish people cannot live within one millet. That we have to have multiple millets equally recognized by the state of Israel, unless you just get rid of millets altogether, but that's for another lecture. If not, here, at the holiest site of the Jewish people, we were going to recognize the Jewish people have come home and we're not the same. And everybody, imagine the visuals of all Jews coming together at the plaza, and each Jew deciding what is the Judaism that represents their spiritual and moral perspectives. They would go pray, and they all come back, and the plaza is where Jews walk with each other, and from there we go to our kotels, all part of the kotel. It was beautiful. There's only one problem. Israeli society was not committed to that issue. Any change in the Derech Eretz of Israel that comes from the top down through legislation will not pass in this coalition. While the moral, spiritual Derech Eretz, this is what should be. This is the picture of the Jew. This is the way the Jews should treat each other. But if we want the Jews to treat each other this way, it's only going to happen when this is what the Jews want. When the Jews want a singular the kotel, there will be a the kotel. While the original millet system was parachuted from high by the United Nations, forced on secular Israeli society, changes in the status of state and religion in Israel are only going to happen when the bottom actually wants to change. Because otherwise, the ultra-Orthodox are going to say, you're changing the status quo. And it's not going to come from another government. Because another government, if it sits with the Haredim, the first simple rule of every government is maintaining the status quo. Every single Israeli politician will sign maintaining the status quo because that is perceived to be a legitimate political demand of the Haredi parties. Status quo is going to remain. You want to change the status quo. It's not going to come because the Haredim agree, but rather because either members of the Likud, the Jewish Home, Yisrael Beitenu, or Kulanu. The other non-Orthodox parties, including the religious Zionist party in Israel, which is in fact very, very moderate on issues of state and religion, remarkably moderate on issues of state and religion. Naftali Bennett is consistently, he wanted this deal. He pushed for this deal. But if you want to make the change, it's going to happen when a large segment of Israeli society doesn't merely care about this issue, but they care about it enough that it is one of the primary issues that they vote for. Because while a X percentage could say we're for, and in a coalition government, you don't need a majority of Israelis. You just need 10, 20%. But 10, 20%, 40% of Israelis are for this deal on the Kotel. 48%. But you need that 48% to make this issue number 3 and not number 17 out of their top 10. That's why polls are very often confusing. Are you for? Sure, I'm for. But how for are you? I know you're for a lot of things. You're also for world, everything. But are you willing to prioritize it? To create that reprioritization, it's going to have to happen from the bottom up. Anything short of a long-term educational transformation of Israeli society, and it is going to lead us to constant failure. What are the Derech Eretz consequences of this? First, and here I'm offering one of those what I know what I know, but I don't know if that which I know is correct. It is my personal belief that the Jewish world should embrace a kotel. On the one hand, we are insulted that we didn't get the kotel. And I appreciate it. It takes a year to get over when someone slaps you in the face, stabs you in the back, steps on you, and says, I didn't do anything. You don't necessarily feel that good about it. But if our goal is to create an Israel and a Jewish world which could live together, is the difference between the kotel and a kotel as significant as it's being portrayed? It is. But maybe the flaw was our belief that we could shortcut the democratic system of Israel, which is ultimately working with the sovereign, and working with the sovereign is to work with the citizen. Israel in 1947, the narrative between Israelis and Palestinians, the Israeli narrative is always that every peace deal we said yes, and they said no. I'm not getting into the factual part of that. But in the partition plan, we took what was fundamentally an unviable deal, and we said yes. I believe that what the Jewish world should do is it should embrace a kotel. And it should make sure that at that kotel, even though you can't get in from the plaza, you will hear the singing in the plaza. That it will be full, it will be vibrant, it will be alive. I think every single liberal Jew in Israel for the next 5 years should say no more bar mitzvahs and shuls. All bar mitzvahs happen at our kotel. Do you know what's actually happening at a kotel? It's empty most of the time. Picks up a little bit in the summer when there's trips from North America. You think that's the way you're going to change Israeli society? At a kotel, right-wing religious groups are actually now going to pray. Because they want to because some of them don't even want you to have a kotel. So lay claim to your kotel. We were given were we given everything we want? No. Is it perfect? No. Am I insulted? Yes. I'm not insulted by the Likud government. I'm insulted by the Ottoman Empire. And by a system that's been instituted since that needs to change, without doubt. But the only way we're going to change it is when more and more Israelis say, I've had it and I'm not going to take it anymore. When they feel that their religious and spiritual needs aren't being addressed, great, let's give a kotel. Let this be the place that everybody who wants a bar mitzvah, where would you want to go? You want to go here or you want to go here? When this is compelling, when this is exciting, then this will be the kotel. It'll be the kotel because it's the place where people want to go. It's not going to be the kotel because the country legislates. Derech Eretz, in our attempt to look at the discourse, sometimes the language conflates the insult. And sometimes over time, we have a chance to think about it. At the moment, I was furious, like everybody else, because we tasted victory. It was going to be, listen, I don't mind if it gets parachuted up from on top. Someone didn't realize these are nice moments. It's like in 1992 when somehow Shas didn't realize that it was signing the basic law of human freedom and dignity, that it was creating the foundations for a legal transformation of freedom and religion. It didn't realize. So sometimes you get a benefit. But those benefits, by the way, don't last. Because then the political process, which represents the will of the people don't want a coalition to fall over this. And you're not going to keep Israel within a certain parameter of religious discourse which doesn't reflect the society. And it means that while we have to work on a political and on a legal front, our primary work has to go back to the educational front. The kotel. Derech Eretz, if a kotel is alive, then we liberal Jews will feel we have a place. But it will be alive if we make it alive. And the Derech Eretz in the future is not a Derech Eretz of politics. It's a Derech Eretz of the long-term educational work of creating community after community after community. And when you have 500 communities in Israel, and that's one of the dreams of the Hartman Institute in our rabbinic school, when we have 500 communities all over Israel, with hundreds and hundreds of people, with 50 bar mitzvahs a year, with celebrations, and every one of them goes to a kotel. They could call it a kotel. We will turn it into the place for religious life in Israel. I want to stop not for your questions, but just to feel a moment of self-satisfaction at the fact that the technology worked. Now, I am going to take that as a clap to me. Not to the technology. It's because what is technology? It's all dependent on the user. And I was, I can now relax. This was very angst-filling. Nothing to do with the kotel. It had to do with this. The second, I want to, actually, I'm going to skip the conversion because we don't have the time. I want to get to one of the key issues. No, you know what? I can skip the conversion because it's really important. And if I have to. There is a discourse in the Jewish world that the whole status quo between Jews is being changed because Israel is about to put forth a new conversion bill. And in that new conversion bill, the only legitimate conversions in Israel are going to be Orthodox. And this, together with the Kotel, is just one further slap in the face of liberal Judaism. One further step away from, or where Israel goes in one direction and North American Jews are going in another direction. An increasing sense that there is no Derech Eretz for me as a liberal Jew in Israel. You don't accept my child as a Jew. If I'm conservative, if I'm reform, you don't accept me. Where's your decency? Where is your respect? How do you ask me to be with you when you don't respect me? There are two important things to know about this conversion bill. A, it is not changing, it is no new innovation or change in the status of liberal Jews in Israel. And B, Any statement which posits that Israel does not accept non-Orthodox Jews is false to a large degree. And it is critical to separate and to distinguish between Israel and, just like we have the Kotel, and the rabbinate. And while many of you know this, it's extremely important to reiterate it if we're going to be able to have a Derech Eretz with each other. There are real issues on the table. There are real issues of concern. But when certain issues are put forth as changing the status quo, because then it's perfectly legitimate for North America to say, you're changing the status quo. Israel is moving further and further away from its respect for liberal Jews. Israel has the rabbinate has disrespected liberal Jews since the beginning of the state. Not just the rabbinate, all Orthodox rabbis, or most Orthodox rabbis, don't accept the conversions of conservative Reform Jews. There's a small number of Orthodox rabbis who at times will look at who was the rabbi, what was the court, and whether it was done according to certain halachic criteria. But by and large, this is not an Israeli phenomenon. This is a Jewish denominational issue on the relationship between Orthodox, conservative, and Reform. And on how you enter Judaism, there is a debate. To what extent does a person who comes to convert have to accept upon themselves all of Jewish law? In which case, as an Orthodox rabbi, you have to accept to be an Orthodox Jew. Now, conversions already since 1953 are solely under the domain of the millet. The basic law regulating the status of the rabbinate in Israel is not new. Conservative and Reform conversions are not accepted by the rabbinate since the beginning of the state. The new legislation that's being put on the table has nothing to do with changing the status quo. It's actually legislation which is attempting to protect the status quo. Why? There are rabbis in the rabbinate who want to do conversions, Orthodox conversions, different from the way the rest of the rabbinate does the conversions. There are 400,000 non-Jews, Jewish non-Jews living in Israeli society. With the birth rate in Israel, they are growing at approximately a rate of 5,000 to 7,000 a year, either through immigration or birth rate. Only 2,000 are converted, 2,000 to 3,000. That means the doorway to Judaism through the rabbinate is not wide enough. There's now 10% intermarriage in Israeli society. It's not wide enough to enable people who see themselves as Jews to become formally Jews within the state. Because most of those who see themselves as Jews don't see themselves as Orthodox and have no desire to be Orthodox. And as long as the condition is to be Orthodox, they're not going to go. A whole group of Orthodox rabbis who are part of the rabbinate said that this condition is an unnecessary restriction, that Jewish law doesn't require you to be Orthodox in order to convert. It doesn't require. And that we're willing to convert people who want to be Jews and have a part of Judaism even if they don't want to be Orthodox. Since they are technically part of the rabbinate, the Supreme Court legislated that they're allowed to go ahead with their conversions because it's still exclusively within the Orthodox parameters. The legislation coming through the Knesset right now is to state that the only, and Netanyahu set forth, appointed Nissim, a former Minister of Justice, to put forth recommendation for a law, and in that law it states the only legitimate conversions in Israel will be formed by a body. Now, whether it's formed by a body controlled by the rabbinate or not, the basic idea is that not every rabbi who wakes up and decides, I want to do a conversion, is going to do a conversion. That might seem reasonable for most of Jewish life. That's the way it works. A rabbi wakes up, it doesn't wake up in the morning, has a certain principle and converts. And the Jewish people decide whether they want to marry each other or not. And usually Jews decide to marry because if you decide that you are the only one who's a good Jew, you're probably going to have a lot of problems finding people to marry. And so Jews ultimately married and just didn't check so carefully. But in Israel, here it is. We have a state. How do we have a formal system? Now, why is it that in liberal Jewish community in North America, there is a perception that something dramatic is changing, and that somehow yet one further step away from Israel's recognition of liberal Judaism is about to happen? And liberal Judaism in America includes modern Orthodox, conservative reform, reconstructionist renewal. Including, by the way, there are many Orthodox rabbis in Israel, in North America, whose conversions aren't accepted either by the rabbin. Once the court, the Supreme Court or Israeli law, recognizes multiple forms or multiple bodies performing conversions, they are basically creating multiple millets, breaking the millet monopoly. And even though, you have to realize there are 11 Christian millets in Israel, even though at present they're still Orthodox, the minute you go from 1 to 2, the Supreme Court case is already waiting to be ruled upon, in which liberal Jews, Reform and Conservative, come forth and say, well, if their conversions are allowed, once you said you need a singular, and without that Jews can't marry Jews in the country, whatever narrative you tell, once you have any multiplicity, any plurality, what is the legal justification for stopping at 2 and not creating 4? You have 9 Christian, 11 Christian, why should you only have 1 Jewish? If Israel would allow multiple Orthodox conversions, it would serve as a legal foundation for the liberal Jewish petitions at the court. How is this similar to the Kotel? Here too again, you're hoping that through legislation built on the basic law of human freedom and dignity that we've talked about here in the past that I can't talk about today, will serve as a foundation for changing the core discriminatory original sin of the singular millet. But there too again, it's that the Derech Eretz of politics, of legislation, is not going to be the vehicle to transform Israeli society. Because Israeli society is going to ask, do I want my coalition? Do I want my coalition? Is the issue of how many liberal Jewish conversions do I have? Now, in fact, Israelis recognize that there is a serious problem here. There is a whole segment of Israeli society which cannot become Jewish even though they want to and even though they see themselves as such. This is actually a compelling case. But still, it's not number 3 yet on the voting preference of Israelis. But here's something even more interesting. The rabbinate does not accept liberal Jewish conversions. The rabbinate does not accept liberal Jewish Judaisms as an authentic millet. Israeli society, however, does. Israeli society, and in this political over-politicized discourse, one of the more interesting things about Israeli society is forgotten. Israeli society has the most pluralistic I'm talking about the society, not the rabbinate. Israeli society has the most pluralistic definition of Jewishness of any Jewish society in the Jewish world. Anybody who would be attacked for being a Jew is accepted in Israel as a Jew. If you're converted by conservative or reform, if you have a Jewish grandparent, Israeli society says you are a citizen of my country. In everyday life, Jewishness or lack of Jewishness is not determined by whether the rabbinate will marry you. It's determined by which kindergarten you go to. It's determined by which neighborhood you live in. Now, part of this is a result of the conflict. In Israel, and I'm not making an ideology of it, but anyone who is a Jew, he or she who's not a Palestinian. A Russian who's married to someone who has one Jewish grandparent is part of a Jewish society. When you rent a house, when you want to buy property, when you want to go move to a certain neighborhood, when you want to serve in the army, for every functional purpose on an everyday basis, Israeli society accepts everybody as a Jew on the basis of their own self-definition. Nobody's sitting there and saying, 1 second, you're not Orthodox, you're not Jewish. That's not the way Israeli society is functioning. It's true. There is a rabbinate still controlled by this millet Orthodox. And we've never created, and they haven't even thought yet about creating these multiple different millets, and it will happen. But again, the ultra-Orthodox in this coalition are sitting there and saying, I'm not going to let you change the status quo. And in this government, that status quo will not change from the top down. But in fact, here, there's even greater hope. The rabbinate is less and less a functioning organization in Israeli society. The only marriages that could take place in Israel are through the rabbinate is technically and legally true, but no longer in fact true. Israelis are getting married by, they're appointing multiple other rabbis to create their own religious ceremonies. More and more Israelis aren't getting married. As long as the rabbinate actually, the legislation, the Supreme Court was going to save the rabbinate. Without the Supreme Court allowing other conversions, you are going to be left with a rabbinate with all the legal monopoly, but which is increasingly losing the population. Here too, what does Derech Eretz require? Political work or educational work? When it comes to the rabbinate, we're this close. Israeli society is voting with its feet. Less and less people are getting married in the rabbinate. Other conversions are taking place. People are marrying Russian Jews, and they see them as Jews. Life is more complicated. Do you have the patience to wait? In this environment, any shortcut will fail. Our job is to not feel that the only way we Israelis and Jews, we Israeli Jews, we Israelis and we North Americans could live with each other, is if we change the political Derech Eretz of Israel. That is one way. But in a democracy, that's not the way which will sustain itself. In a democracy, what will sustain itself is when the sovereign changes. And so this was a bad year. It created an increasing sense of our inability to be with each other. That you're not treating me with Derech Eretz. And it's true. It's true. Israel is not treating North American Jews with Derech Eretz. And that has to change. But if you feel that the only change that you could make is through the political process, you are going to be increasing the mutual alienation. And not only that, you will become increasingly irrelevant. Because what you are in essence arguing is that the only way you could have a relationship with Israel is if we move from a blue coalition to a red coalition. Not only will that not help, but that increasingly puts you at partisan odds with Israeli society. And then we no longer have a Jewish people. We have blue Jews and red Jews. We need Jews who are working to try to create the type of Derech Eretz we need. And the Derech Eretz we need is not a Derech Eretz which will come only through manipulating or mastering political Derech Eretz, but it's by recognizing that Derech Eretz of values is ultimately shaped by education. And whether we, Jews, are going to spend the next 50 years building a new Derech Eretz with each other. It's true, taking insult. True, recognizing that Israeli society right now is not where I want it to be. But saying, as Yehuda said, if Israel is one of the most, or he said, the most interesting thing that happened to the Jewish people, does it pay for you to stick around? Does it pay for you to fight? Does it pay for you to pick and develop a new Derech Eretz, which will change the Derech Eretz of Israeli society? Thank you. And now we have, I apologize, it took a little longer, but yes, please. What's entirely missing is? I couldn't hear, I missed.
The issue that you touched on at the end of your talk just now, and that is, what is the implication? What can we learn from the stability and persistence of this new coalition? And I would suggest that one could make, in fact, a strong evidence-based case that it tells us that the majority of Jewish Israelis are comfortable with racist attitudes towards Arab citizens of Israel, never mind Palestinian residents of the occupied territories. That the majority of Jewish Israelis are comfortable with the Minister of Justice, whose attachment to basic principles of human and civil rights and to the independence of the courts is somewhere between dubious and non-existent. That the majority of Jewish Israelis are content with a minister of culture who thinks it is a legitimate function of government to squelch or at least attempt
etc. Can we do an etc.? Could we do it in etc.? I understand. Okay, etc.? I love you. Yes. Now, again, it's a great, yeah. Yes. Okay. You and I, we've been speaking with each other. They're showing you Derech Eretz. You and I have been speaking with each other for a long time. I don't agree. And again, under the caveat that I'm not necessarily saying that I'm correct, but I don't agree. What you could get from this coalition is the following. Israelis believe that the most significant issue they face is Iran and Syria. The second most significant issue they face is a Middle East that is imploding in Shiite-Sunni holy war, which but for the grace of God or a blue government is keeping our life at a cost. I'm not going to ignore what you're saying, I promise you. But that life in Israel, as distinct from life for Jews and Israeli Arabs, is unique within thousands of miles of radius. And that to protect that is the primary issue that we vote for. Now, it's true. Part of this coalition puts forth various issues and various policies that you and I, including many Israelis, do not agree with. But when they have to prioritize their voting process, the stability of this coalition says, yes, so there'll be less Haredim in the army. So yes, I will let the religious Zionist community shift the Supreme Court here or there, and we don't yet know exactly how far it's going to go. Yes, even the Prime Minister himself, that this coalition uses a language of fear more than this coalition. And when you use a language of fear, more often than not, there are people who get elevated to the status of those who you have to be afraid of. There are serious Derech Eretz consequences of this. The only thing that I would posit, and I didn't get to the third issue, is that Israeli society, at every marker that we have currently, has not shifted dramatically on issues of its commitment to democracy or to human rights. Hasn't shifted dramatically. What's shifted is the prioritization that it gives for some of those issues over issues of security and survival. What makes it more complicated is that the people who fought most ardently, that's the right word, for issues of democracy and civil liberties were very often members of the Likud party. The liberals of Israeli society were Menachem Begin, etc. Not Shimon Peres. It wasn't. The labor socialists, the country was theirs. Some of you read Jabotinsky. The thing that's shifted is that the Likud itself is willing to compromise on these issues in order to deal with what it believes are the greater security challenges of the country. Now, I'm not saying it's necessarily right, but part of Derech Eretz is to hear the other side speak about itself. Not speak about your perception or it's how do they talk about itself. Now, I'm not going to be able to deal with this adequately, and maybe your question was an attempt to give me a chance to do the third issue that I didn't have a chance to deal with. But, and that I'm going to assume that it was, because we know each other. I planted him. When we talk about the occupation, there is real, again, I personally believe that the land is also occupied. I believe that the land belongs to, that the land between the Jordan and the Mediterranean, parts of it belong to the Jewish people and parts of it belong to the Palestinian people. That's my own personal belief. But whether you think the land is occupied, I buy into the partition plan. And I've given up part of my heritage, part of my past. But that's my politics, which are irrelevant to you, and they fall under the same category of knowing what I know, but not knowing whether I know what I know is correct. But regardless of whether you think the land is occupied, there is a people being occupied. And regardless of whether you think that occupation is just, there are people suffering every single day. And one of the most, and the significant consequence of that occupation is both on the suffering of Palestinians and on the moral consequences of somebody who is an occupier for a long period of time. Those way leads to way, and there are consequences to it. However, if you want to understand Israeli society, what's shifted is not an Israeli society who just 20 years ago was for a Palestinian state. In somewhere 76 or 80, almost close to 80% of Israelis were for a two-state solution at a time when 80% of Israelis would not agree that today is Tuesday. And now only 44 to 46% are for a two-state solution. Why? What changed is the fact that all of a sudden Palestinians become transparent, human rights becomes irrelevant. There is an argument to that. But that's not the Israel that I know, nor what I believe is motivating Israeli society. The primary thing that's changed over the last 10, 15 years, and the significant moment was the unilateral withdrawal from Gaza, which you could say was just our own private story, but from the perspective of Israelis would still be for a two-state solution if they could have any understanding of what the other state would look like. And the move away from a two-state solution is because Israelis feel that there is no viable option at present for a peaceful solution of two states living side by side in peace and security. From an Israeli perspective, and again, I'm not claiming it's right, and I'm not belittling the consequences of Derech Eretz. How do we develop a Derech Eretz towards Palestinians? And the longer you occupy, you don't even try anymore. It's tough. It just, you change. Not to speak of the suffering of somebody being occupied. I'm not belittling it for a moment. The vast majority of Israelis do not believe that there is a political solution, at least right now, which could solve this problem. They're frightened, and this you will hear from every single Israeli. You want to withdraw from Judea and Samaria? The language is, do you want a second Gaza? Do you want a second Gaza? Now, again, I'm not going to get into a political debate here with anybody. And I'm not saying whether you think it's correct. But if you want to talk to Israelis, you need an answer to that question. Not an answer to the question, what about the moral consequences of the occupation? No, it's okay. That's my mother. Now, if you want to talk to Israelis, and it's not that all of a sudden we woke up and human rights doesn't matter anymore. It's not true. It's not that they don't matter anymore. It's just, what am I supposed to do? What happens if from 6,000 to 10,000 miles away you state, can't you just solve the problem? And from ground zero we say, I would like to if you would give me an intelligent, great. I'm not justifying settlements. I'm not justifying building on this. I'm not justifying any of that. Tell me what I should do other than say you should get along. The last time that Israel did a major withdrawal because it was worried about the democracy of Israel was Gaza. And Israelis are saying, that's correct. I will have to deal with that because for me to create a democracy is to create a strip along the line, along Israel and Judea and Samaria, where kites will shut down Ben Gurion Airport. Mortars, kites. Forget about tunnels and what. It's just, there is something, and I know it is a different perception. Israelis look at what most of the world saw as demonstrations in Gaza and says, I don't even know what you're talking about. You think people were just demonstrating their economic plight? They were declaring the goal of their demonstration was to break the fence, to reclaim their land. Now, again, I believe, as I said, I believe that Judea and Samaria is occupied. I don't believe Israel's occupied. I believe we're at home. And I want to live side by side with Palestinians in peace and security. But I could only do that if there's somebody who I believe could live in peace and security. Israelis want an answer to that question. So it's not that Israelis have shifted and become this morally corrupt all of a sudden that, and this is the language, that because we're with Trump, we've become Trump. Beware. That's part of, and again, I'm not getting into who Trump is. I'll leave that for you to debate. But no, and again, you need me to get involved in American politics like a hole in the head. Like that's not what you came to Israel for. But the notion that as if this discourse, this American discourse, which very often divides red and white, red and blues, where if you're on one position, you have a position about science, and if you're one, you have the same position on science and global warming, guns, immigration, abortion. It's like, wow, how did you create that? Like Israelis, it's not where it is. Israelis believe that Netanyahu provides the most serious response to our security needs. Do you know what it's like? And I say this over and again. What's Iran doing in Syria? Like, you know what it does to an Israeli? Like, what did I do to you? Now, I know I'm a Jew and you're a Muslim, but what did you don't, now we know, you don't have a functioning, what are you doing there? It's a very destabilizing environment. And it's precisely as Israel, we want to preserve that. Israelis believe that Netanyahu is a very responsible prime minister dealing with the well-being of Israeli society. And until we know how to do and to maintain that within a larger Middle Eastern peace move, Floridian slip, we're going to stay, the majority of Israelis are just going to stay with the blue. Not because they don't care about human rights and democracy, but because they just don't know what they're supposed to do. Yes, please. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use my prerogative as president of the Hartman Institute to tell the staff of the Hartman Institute that I'm going to be going till 11:15, and that your recess will be 20 minutes, so 5 minutes will be taken off the next class, and anybody who has a problem will sue me. So we'll take, they could come to my office later, and I'll deal with it. So we're going to take 10 more minutes because I know I spoke too long and you have a lot of questions, but please, yes.
What you say, and
It's a more complicated story.
And I think that Jewish Americans that see things from perspective, their job is to open the eyes of Israelis.
Thank you.
Through the non-profit organization they're talking about voluntarily.
Thank you. Yes, please. And I apologize, I'm going to try, and I'm going to come to you, okay? And by definition, I'm not going to get to everybody. Yes, please.
I'll talk loudly because I'm in the back.
You're good.
I hear everything you said, and I agree, and I think it was eloquently said. My question is, since Israel has the power in the relationship with the Palestinians, what is our moral vision for the future? What is the moral vision for Israel to take action to determine its own destiny in the situation?
I'm struggling with that question. And I'm going to tell you something that doesn't even qualify as I know what I know. Because it's just unacceptable for me to occupy another people. Not because another people doesn't deserve to be occupied. Because what's hateful unto you, do not do unto others. I'm a pro-Palestinian Zionist. I yearn for a Palestinian state, for the Palestinians to be free. And I believe they're just like at the foundation of Zionism is my recognition of the rights of Jews to sovereignty, requires me to believe that for Palestinians. I believed it since I was a child, since my mother, from when I was a young kid in Israel. I always felt that this was wrong. And right now, you're in this moment that you're stuck. Is it possible, and this I'm playing with now, and I'm just take it as a thought, that actually the two-state solution is detrimental to the moral fiber of Israeli society? Because a two-state solution says, I solve my moral responsibility to Palestinians through a political solution which can't be implemented in my lifetime, don't critique me, I was for the two-state solution. In other words, I fulfill all of my moral responsibility to Palestinians by saying I'm for the two-state solution. Maybe we need to begin to go back to, and I know, I apologize, I can't believe I'm saying it. Maybe we have to go back to the 1977 autonomy plan. Maybe we have to start going back to area A and B, giving them more autonomy. Maybe the steps have to be to recognize and admit that Palestinians in Judea and Samaria are experiencing a Nakba. They are experiencing a catastrophe. They are occupied. And it is our job to do everything in our power to lessen the footprint of that occupation, short of committing suicide, which is not my moral responsibility. And that means maybe we have to look much more carefully. What is area A and B? Area A, which is under political and military police control of the Palestinian Authority. Area B, only the political. How do we maximize that? How do we create greater sense of autonomy? Again, how do we finalize and solve the problems of Gaza? These are real things that we could do. But again, the solution for Gaza is not, okay, lift the blockade. Again, what do I do? But are there solutions? Yes, we can. And paradoxically, because we have become messianic about our political solution, because we're looking for political Derech Eretz, we're not working sufficiently on the moral Derech Eretz. We could do much better. Palestinians have their sovereign rights have to be respected even if they can't be fulfilled. And how do I begin a process of way leads to way, which maybe one day will come to the place that I want to get to? But if all I have is the messianic dream of next year in Jerusalem, next year a Palestinian state, we might wait 2,000 years. What we need is processes which move forward. And right now, I think any discourse of a two-state solution is completely irrelevant within Israeli society. It's not the reality that Israelis see as in any way viable for the survival. Forget the security, well-being. In this environment, we see Judea and Samaria as becoming Lebanon and Syria and Gaza. And in that, when that's the choice, and then each society has gone in the wrong direction. If we start a different process, we do education and we create autonomy and there's a whole slew of things. It might not give the Palestinians everything, but it will change the discourse. Now, whether at this moment again, just like I recommended that you accept a kotel, just like we Israelis accepted a partition plan, will Palestinians have the wisdom to say, this is the first step of a process, or until you give me everything, I'm not moving? That's out of my hands. But that would be practical suggestions that I would recommend. And I apologize, the last question, and then we have to end, and I feel very, very bad, but I have no choice. Yes, please, ma'am. I hope that's as best as I could do. And I can't tell you how difficult it is for me to give up a 45-year commitment to the immediacy of a two-state solution. I've been holding it since I was a bar mitzvah boy. And it's just right now, I'm wondering whether I am stuck in a political solution that's actually creating a bigger Derech Eretz problem, both amongst Israelis and Palestinians. Last one.
I'm so passionate about what I'm about to say, I'm afraid I'm going to screw it up. I live in the Bay Area, and I have been working in Zionism for 20 years, and the decline in love of Israel and Zionism in the Bay Area Jewish community is terrifying to me. And all of them need to hear what Donniel said today, and all of them say what you said, which I totally understand. And what I want to say to them, and what's happened in the last year has been helpful, is the thought of everything that you said about what you see as Israelis don't care about all of these issues that are important to you. I turn around and say that is like saying Americans don't care that our police are killing black men, and Americans don't care that we're separating people at the border, and Americans don't care that Christian men have a right to tell me what I do with my body. That seems fact to me because we elected a Republican Congress, a Republican Senate, and a Republican President. So by that fact, I do not agree with all those things that I just said. Everyone in this room, and most people in this room agree with me, that's not what we're saying. I didn't elect anyone Republican. And I'm struggling with my own people, and I'm struggling with trying to get them to have a fair and better society. But I don't say all Republicans are idiots. And I don't say all Trump reporters are idiots. And I don't say as a country we're idiots. I say we're failing ourselves and we need to do better. And the Israelis are doing the same thing. And now I can take what Donniel said and go back to the Bay Area and try and explain the Kotel issues and try and explain these other issues and help us all understand each other.
Thank you. Thank you. The one thing, and to conclude, I'll say what makes it a little more difficult is that we're voting for Netanyahu. But we are. But in other words, it doesn't get divided to the same blue, and that's what creates the suspicion. Part of what I'm trying to ask you to think about, and it's a prayer, there are real problems. Let's know what the real problems are. Is a kotel the end of the day, even though it's not the kotel? It's not great, but knowing the difference. Does that mean, are we still two different ships in different oceans? That might make a very big difference. What's the way forward? Are you moving a way forward that will help you, or are you going to, you know the definition of insanity, trying the same thing over and over again and hoping for different results? Is there another way which requires different energies? Let's look. Statements like Israel rejects me as a Jew. Part of Israel does. The majority of Israel doesn't. Knowing the difference doesn't mean that the rabbinate is fine. Doesn't mean that, it's okay. It's not true. There are things that hurt. I can't marry people. I'm an Orthodox rabbi and I can't marry people in Israel because I was ordained by my father. And that's considered not kosher. So how am I changing? I'm now ordaining tens of rabbis. I'm ordaining tens and tens of rabbis. We're going to have our 30th rabbi. It's like, we're going. We're having our 30, another 20 are coming in. And we're going to fight. And I'm not going to, our marriages aren't accepted. Who cares? Guess who accepts my marriages? The Israelis who call me. We're going to work. We're going to work. Derech Eretz also requires that you try to give the other the best reading that they can. There is real problems around the Palestinian. I know it. But we haven't become immoral ogres overnight. There's something about this neighborhood, the realities of the neighborhood, the wars of the neighborhood, living in a place where the cheapest commodity is a life. These aren't nice things, but these affect you. You become like them. The Derech Eretz that I want you to connect to is that it's precisely when you get out of seeing every solution in Israel through the prism of politics, and you're inclined to do so because Israel's a political reality. The minute you get out of that prism, we have a chance of fighting for the real important things that we care about, which are in danger. Because what will we care about in another 20 years? I'm not sure. But right now, we have to fight for the Derech Eretz of Judaism, a Derech Eretz that comes before Torah. And the way to do that is to see where our problems are, see where we have people who we disagree with, build the coalitions that we agree, build the partnerships that we can, and begin to invest in the long-term work of building the educational, religious soul of the Jewish people. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.